life is long, life is hard. And I think, for me, I'm always big on rather have 50% of something than 100% of nothing. And it takes different skill sets to build a really scalable business.
Yeah.
And it takes to carry the load early on, it requires that support, even as you go on the journey.
Yeah.
And so for me, I believe that having more than one co-founder is important. And even as you think about raising money, I mean, even now as an investor, you do find that there's more comfort around investing in teams where there's more than one founder, because there's a sense of balance with different skills. Also, early on when you're building, you can't necessarily afford to go and hire the 10 best guys So go get 2 or 3 strong co-founders.
Put in sweat.
You're going to sweat, you're going to grind, you're going to build, you're going to tweak. And I think that's often how you get to where you're going.
We got it next. That's how you finesse. We come for they next. We come to collect. Did it all on my own, yeah. When it brought it back home, yeah. Now they calling my phone, yeah. But I'm all in my zone. They not a threat. Tell them reset. When they at their best, we still not impressed. Did it all on my own, yeah. When it brought it back home, yeah. Bought a watch with the stones, yeah.
Right before we start, we want to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Chapter. Chapter ensures that your online business never sleeps. We started Chapter when you realize that businesses use social media to talk to their customers and they end up losing up to 40% of their sales due to abandoned carts. This happens when a customer DMs you on Instagram, a customer sends you a message on WhatsApp and you're not able to respond within 7 minutes. This then leads the customer to look for another business to look for that particular good or service that you're offering. With Chapter, you can be able to elevate the customer experience by running AI agents that can be able to respond to customers in less than 30 seconds on both Instagram and WhatsApp. If you want to make sure your business never sleeps, if you want to make sure that you can increase the revenue you're able to make by up to 5x, just visit www.chapter.co and we'll be able to help you. So that's Chapter without an A, so chpter.co. And we'll be able to turn your business into a business that will thrive in the AI future.
So hello, champions. Welcome back to yet another episode of Chapter Champions. So this is episode 2, season 3. And as you can see, I'm super excited because of the host we have today. He's a long-term friend, an investor in me and my journey. And he's invested in our journey as well as a business. So very excited to have nuggets around, how to access capital. You guys have been asking about this for a while. Welcome, Melvyn.
No, thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, so right before we start, remember to hit the subscribe button so that you can get notified when the next episode drops. And in episode 1, we had Theo of Batu, and very inspiring story. If you haven't checked it out, please do after this episode, obviously. And we're always going to be sharing stories about Africa's movers and shakers. That's why we're here. And so I'd like to introduce the man, the myth, the legend. Yes. So Melvyn Lubega is an experienced technology entrepreneur and investor who has built businesses that serve customers on multiple continents. So most notably, he built and scaled GO1, which is a leading tech platform used by over 17,000 organizations and governments in over 60 countries, guys. 60. They're insane. So GO1 became the first South African unicorn valued at over $2 billion, attracting over $450 million, not rand, dollars in investment from SoftBank, Salesforce Ventures, Microsoft Ventures, and other international investors. And an interesting stat is that every 1.2 seconds, someone somewhere in the world starts a course on their platform. So it's incredible. And now you've moved on to the world of investment, and your partner at Breega. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, Breega.
Breega, one of the fastest growing early stage venture capital investors in Europe and Africa. And you are also recognized by Forbes and many other prestigious, awards, including being named as one of the leading business person on the continent in the 11th All Africa Business Leadership Awards. Congrats on that. That's quite recent. I saw it.
Yeah.
So well done, my G. And we're so glad to have you.
No, really glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yes. You've done so many things. So I think everyone is probably wondering who's this guy. For those who don't know this guy. So tell us who's Melvyn.
So first of all, thank you, as I said earlier, for being for having this conversation.
Yeah.
Who's Melvyn? I think Melvyn is just an African child, really passionate about solving African problems with technology. And so professionally, my goal is to create 100,000 jobs. The businesses I've built or partnered or invested in.
Yeah.
And so we've got a very long way to go. We're just under 2,000. And so got to up my numbers there to get where I'm going before my professional career ends. But otherwise, really passionate about technology.
Okay. Passionate about technology, passionate about the continent, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think we'll start with the journey of, leading up to GO1.
Yeah.
And okay, right before we do that, actually, we always ask, what's your favorite life or business quote?
Life or business quote?
Yes.
Ooh, if you're not living on the edge, you're taking up too much space.
Oh, damn. Drops mic.
I think it's just the importance of always trying to push yourself and show up and, push yourself to that particular way. I think it's one of those things where as entrepreneurs, we often discount what we're possible of, both in ourselves and our businesses. And I think it's something which just to remind yourself, hey, are you pushing yourself to grow, to exceed, to have a bigger impact?
Yeah, makes sense. Talk to me about your background. Obviously, you've lived in South Africa for a long, long time. Were you born here?
Yeah.
And fast forward to how did you end up being in this team that co-founded a $2 billion business?
Yeah, it's interesting. So shout out to East Africa. So my parents are Ugandan by origin and so have strong Ugandan roots, but I was born and raised in South Africa.
Yeah.
And so grew up in my neighborhood not too far from here.
Yeah.
Had always been passionate about business and numbers. And so after my studies here in Joburg, I got a scholarship down to Cape Town and studied actual science, statistics and numbers, but somehow got bored in finance one. And so I remember I met someone called Alan Gray, who runs one of the biggest asset managers here in South Africa. Yeah. And, I was like, how do you go from doing like finance one, DCF modeling to actually end up being at Alan Gray? There was a big jump and I was like, I don't know how this works. And so began reading about value investing, Warren Buffett, Phil Fisher, Benjamin Graham, all the classics in the game at that point in time. Yeah. And essentially a few friends and I convinced some friends to give us money to manage. And so we used to have like, everyone was on scholarship and had spare money. We said, give us your money, we'll manage it for you. Okay. Took ourselves very seriously. On Friday nights, we used to have, in the library, book out a library room and actually have like investment committees and write notes and defend each other. But it's ridiculous. We think about it now, like we probably had like a couple $1,000s to our names that we were managing, but we took ourselves very seriously investing in like listed companies. Yeah. But I think there's lots of things I learned through that particular process about business and just like learning from some of the best. And I'm very big on like reading biographies of people. I think there's so much knowledge in books that we just don't take in and we take for granted. And I think many of that's not making its way to some of the more common forms of media these days. And so it's always important to make sure you go to the source truths. I think from that experience, just to get to the journey of some of the genesis around GO1 and the thinking. So when we had that business, we invested, beat the market for 4 years, made some good money. But ultimately, when some of the team I brought on began working in formal companies, no company wants the intern to be trading stocks, especially when you have inside information and compliance and so forth. And so we couldn't be as nimble. It didn't make sense for us as we were scaling. And so what effectively happened thereafter was we began to do more unlisted stuff, more VC venture capital actually. And so investing in VC for the last 13 years when you go to a throwback. But essentially one of the first companies we invested in was a company called Yoko. They do payments devices here in South Africa. And I guess even working with, like when we invested in them, one of the biggest challenges Kat and the team had was finding people with the right skills and being able to skill them in their workplace. Obviously, many of them, most of the founding team came from like consulting, investment banking, very like, well-trained environments. And then when I saw that problem, then when I worked in investment banking in London, Goldman Sachs, and then Boston Consulting Group here in South Africa, some of the problems we were often working on our clients to solve were often a result of them not investing in their staff. So they're entering a new country. What should we do? Our workforce is too big. Should we cut it? The normal things consultants advise on. And it was odd because the big guys, big corporates, couldn't skill their staff. The small guys said they couldn't afford it. And so
Yeah.
I was fortunate to get a scholarship to Oxford where I focused on technology and education.
Okay.
And it was there where I met one of my co-founders, partners in the business, Andrew, who was also a Rhodes Scholar and classmate. And off the back of that, Andrew came from a background of software development. And so I remember when we were doing our first pitch for the business, I had recorded a video saying that I was the Jobs to his Wozniak. And he said, no, I was the bomber to his Gates. And so I realized that maybe
Steve
we
Ballmer,
don't know who was leaning in on that, but he was definitely more product and
you're
tech
more
focused.
sales.
So I headed up our sales and our revenue operations and stuff in the business as we built it out. And then Andrew had previous partners in a website development business. And then we all came together to then, I guess, as a founding executive, build out what is GO1 today.
Yeah.
So it was more so, in life, you can never really predict the journey. It's important about, I think, one, showing up wherever you are, but more importantly, being mindful of your environment, because the opportunities will present themselves as and when you come. If you asked me 10 years ago, would I be in tech? I would have been like, you're swearing at me.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think about that journey as well.
You thought you'd be in finance?
I mean, because I was a finance background as a numbers guy. Finance guys don't sleep hungry.
Yeah.
I heard that tech guys tech guys eat ramen noodles. I was like, hey,
No, guys out here thinking tech bros are balling and everything. No, we're eating noodles. That's true. Yeah.
So
But still, you went into it. So what drove you into the tech world? Like at that moment, what was running through your mind and you're like, I need to get into this train?
I always ask myself a question of, am I doing something that I'm uniquely placed to do?
Yeah.
And so, look, I was a good banker. I was a really strong consultant and did very well in terms of like the global rankings and stuff. But I asked myself, if I wasn't in this role, could somebody else do it? How am I uniquely adding value?
Yes.
And I remember it was crazy. So after at Oxford, we went through Y Combinator.
Yeah.
And I remember I had an offer to go back to the previous company where I was. And I remember my salary then was 3 times our annual revenue. In the back of your mind, you're like, so I could technically work, then take a third of my revenue, my income, give it to the company, and we're still there. But of course, it's hard to build when you're unfocused. And then we ended up doubling down. But I remember I was invited to, must have been like a BCG alumni event, and the office in San Francisco at the time were overlooking the bay, and I was like, and then we were in a 2-bedroom house, 5 of us in San Francisco, there taking turns on the bed. And so it was definitely, I think, different. But I think what inspired me, one, to continue the journey, I think different parts. Because I think early on, early on, you see this idea, you think no one else has seen it, you're excited, you're pushing.
Yeah.
And look, and you win some clients, you win some awards, you feel like, oh man, I'm onto something.
Yes.
Then you start doing your research and you realize at the time we began as a learning management system. And we discovered there were actually 3,000 learning management systems in the world at the time. 3,000. That's like Red Ocean 101.
Oh, yeah.
And we're fortunate to have won the awards because it means we actually differentiated even without knowing better. But I think the motivations were different. But I think ultimately when we began to scale was realize that we were creating jobs for people.
Yeah.
And, fine, we're all young at the time. And you could say like, look, the business fails. We go back to our parents and say, Mom, Dad, we tried. I'm here to come back to my childhood bedroom. Give me some time.
Yeah.
But as we began to grow and scale and we started to build up our teams, now at 800, you really start appreciating that by you doing well as a business, you're actually creating jobs and you're supporting people with their families.
Yeah.
And I think that's something which, I always believe in founding teams. Having more than one person is always key, because when you're up there down, when you feel like I'm way to corporate, they're like, no, let's push through. Because we're all human.
Yeah.
And so it's hard.
So you bring an important point, and maybe we can touch on it briefly around co-founders, having co-founders versus solo founders.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? I think you've mentioned something.
Yeah, look, life is long, life is hard. And I think, for me, I'm always big on rather have 50% of something than 100% of nothing. And it takes different skill sets to build a really scalable business.
Yeah.
And it takes, to carry the load early on, it requires that support, even as you go on the journey.
Yeah.
And so for me, I believe that having more than one co-founder is important. And even as you think about raising money, I mean, even now as an investor, you do find that there's more comfort around investing in teams where there's more than one founder, because there's a sense of balance, different skills. Also, early on when you're building, you can't necessarily afford to go and hire the 10 best guys So go get 2 or 3 strong co-founders.
Put in sweat.
You're going to sweat, you're going to grind, you're going to build, you're going to tweak. And I think that's often how you get to where you're going. Yeah. But I think, look, more my co-founders in my businesses over time have been friends.
Yeah.
But definitely we've all learned and grown together. But I'm a big believer of, if you can go on the journey together, go on the journey together.
Makes sense. Great. And you end up in this situation where you start this really big company. Do you believe in luck?
I definitely believe in luck, but I think luck in and of itself won't get you anywhere. I'm a big believer that success happens when opportunity, call it luck, meets preparation.
Okay.
So when we were looking at our Series B, which Microsoft M12 came in on, the first time we met the Microsoft team, if we didn't know who we were engaging with, if we, when we spoke to the person, didn't actually understand our business and have our pitch down, it would never have happened. And in those crucible moments, you ask yourself, like, are you ready to show up? And so my question is always like, are you preparing yourself today for that opportunity? Because when success, or rather success is opportunity meets preparation, opportunity is random. And yes, the same way you can make sure that you are in the right rooms, going to the events to have that opportunity happen more often than you think.
Yeah.
Without preparation, it's nothing.
Makes sense. Yeah. Interesting. So, reconstruct the journey, please, for us from sharing a bed to 800 employees. Like, what are some of the inflection points that you feel led you to where you're at today?
Yeah.
And when are some of those moments that you felt like, I mean, this was probably early on, that I should just quit and go for that job, you know?
Yeah, look, it's, in hindsight, it's very easy to romanticize the journey because when you're early on worried about cash burn and you're thinking about runway and that big client's not paying you, but they've already put you on the website like you're a big client, partner of theirs, like we've all been on those particular journeys.
Yeah.
I think for us, if you think about the business and its operations, so when we began GO1, so just for everyone's context, so GO1 is like, think of it like Spotify for professional learning.
Okay.
So we aggregate, training courses, videos, summaries into one subscription, and then offer that typically B2B, but also now we have B2C to business and governments and individuals around the world.
Brilliant.
Ultimately, subscription marketplace from that perspective.
Yeah.
And when we began, we were a bookshelf, to be honest. We were like a learning platform where you use a shell where you could put your courses and your videos and your PDFs and so forth in it. And the same way, like, look, no one buys a bookshelf without wanting to put books in it. Though I see we've got some nice things on this bookshelf as well. But no one buys a bookshelf without wanting to put books on it.
Yeah.
And so the insight for us was many of our clients, and especially when I was on the sales side, because I was building our sales team, I'd go to a client, demo the solution with our own dummy content. And I'd be like, cool, we can put yours in. And many clients were actually embarrassed because they were like, oh no, my videos are ugly, or don't judge us. Because everyone's always self-conscious about their own internal stuff versus what's international. So then it will kill your sales cycle by like 6 months because you're busy with a client trying to say, no, don't worry, your stuff is okay. You can put it to the platform. And like, oh no, we'll create new content soon. And the reality is, it's important to understand, why is a client buying you? And I found early on, the first 10 clients were buying us for 10 different reasons. Because the reality is, yes, because you're able to sell, they were able to buy.
Yeah.
And so the key thing for us was deeply understanding, why are clients buying from us and what problem are we actually solving?
Okay.
Because it's easy to look at sales and be like, oh no, I've got $1 million in sales, we're doing well. No, why are they buying? What problem are we actually solving? And so off the back of that, just being able to then say, unpacking that need, that customers wanted to upskill their staff and make sure that they were trained for the task at hand.
Okay.
And so no client is going to the board saying, oh no, I want to buy an LMS. They're saying, hey, I want the most productive workforce. I want to retain my people and attract the best people.
Yeah.
And so how do we offer a more comprehensive solution towards that outcome?
Yes.
And so that's when and the big insight was in going from just being the shelf to actually offering the books. So actually offering the content as a part of the offering.
Got it.
And so building that up over time. And so, because at the time we had two types of customers. We had content consuming customers, like a normal client, and we had those creating content, like a training company or whoever it was.
Yes.
But they were selling to each other outside of our platform.
So you brought them together.
So I was like, hey, why can't we create a marketplace between the two of them to start offering stuff?
Okay.
Only problem was, our content consuming clients actually wanted more content than we could actually onboard as clients to come to the platform. So then we began to aggregate and say, fine, you don't have to just be a client of ours on the creating side to actually use the platform to sell.
Yes.
So then we began to aggregate. And over time, we then had a library of aggregation where our clients who are consuming were able to then buy like as a one-stop shop.
Interesting.
And so today, most of our revenue comes from our content library. And so we actually partner with other LXPs, HRIS, okay, essentially learning platforms, HR platforms, and others to be able to bring our content library, which we've curated from the best providers in the world, into that ecosystem. And I think in that journey, there have been different inflection points, but the key thing was always asking the question of what problem am I actually solving? And going deeper into that need and understanding your customer. And also as we've grown, our customers have become not only our clients who give us money, but also our partners whose content we use. And because they're one side of the marketplace, as well as also now the actual platforms like the HR brands we integrate with, who sell us alongside their solutions.
Yes.
Because when we began the business, I mean, coming off the back of YC, big thing about, what book was it then? I think back then there was a great book came out then, The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
Love that book.
Launched that week, actually, must have been like the second week of YC. And it's got some, every chapter begins with a rap verse. You feel like you're in it. I was like,
the hip-hop stuff.
But in the same vein, I remember one of the YC partners recommended this book called Predictable Revenue. I think it was Aaron Ross, and about B2B sales. And as an actuary, I wasn't necessarily the man going out there and selling things. I'm a numbers guy. But I think in our internal sales funnel, we're growing like 20% month to month for like 3 years. Like we're doing well.
Wow.
But as we got to scale, we're like thinking, how do we create share value and do partnership models? And so to your question, the next inflection point was when we actually began to focus on partnering for go-to-market versus going directly ourselves. And actually saying, how do you empower your partners or your people to be able to then say, can you sell our product?
Yes.
And that's a different phase of growth, which allows you different scale. Because they're rooms you'll never get into for whatever reason, and they have the access and the ear of the client you want to get to. And so I think over that journey, that's been our progression on the product side, which I think actually maps the growth of the business. And I think it's always like, if you do the right things, you'll get the outcome in the end. The same way, I know if I create 100,000 jobs, I won't be a poor man, but I would have had an impact as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. On the challenges side.
We didn't share the challenges there. I mean, there were like many challenges. See, the funny thing is, again, like there've been so many challenges. I mean, there's not an aspect of the business that I can't think of we haven't had a challenge in, from people to fundraising to culture when you expand. I mean, like there's so many different elements. I think business is ultimately solving problems profitably. If you're able to, as a business person, solve a problem profitably, even your own problems within your business, even the ones in the market, you'll make money.
So how would you advise the guys before you get to profitability? Sometimes you need to build a product, what they call the valley of death. How would you advise founders to go through that period?
And when I say solve problems profitably, I'm not saying you want to say a profitable company. It's about saying, when I solve a problem, cost benefit, am I better off? And it's more than micro decisions. I think the best entrepreneurs are investors because they have that mindset of thinking of return on investment. Do I enter this market? Do I hire that person? Do I spend on that marketing channel? And the same way, the best investors are entrepreneurs because they understand what it takes to be a sparring partner for those. And so when you think about even pre-profitability, there's so much you can do, but I think the key goal is to get to a point where you are able to solve a problem and create value for a customer and capture that value in a way where you are we're able to create more value than you capture. And that's the key thing. It's as simple as that, because I think often you can get lost in, I want to build this, I must get there, but you have to ask yourself very clinically. Like, I find when you have less resources, you make better decisions.
True.
I find that
prioritization is better.
It focuses the mind. And so should you be hiring that person? Should you be building that? Is that feature really needed? Like, what needs to be true for you to test that, to know where you're going? Even if it's not a tech business, same thing. Like, what do you need to get out there to test your key hypotheses? Like, to be fair, when you think about build, so let's think about building a business as hypothesis you want to test. So you're saying, like, look, I believe that I can service customers better by doing X, Y, Z. You integrating with Google Maps doesn't mean you've tested anything. That knew it could be possible. And I think, and so the question is, how do you test the key hypotheses that unlock the business model? Like Uber example, like, would people be willing to get into cars with random people? We know that they would because of the taxi industry. Would they get into a car that isn't marked as a taxi? That's something you should test. Is someone willing to go and put their car up and drive a random stranger in the back of their car? I don't know. Let's test that. And you might realize, oh no, for them to have comfort in doing that, you must get the person's ID and their bank account. And those are the key things you must test. And none of those things really require building. You want to build with confidence, knowing that you solve the problem you want to solve.
Very interesting. So I think we haven't even gone into your investor hat, but you talked about like team. You talked about solving problems profitably. Anything else that comes to mind around now what founders should be doing to be investable?
So I think in any business, and so I have the privilege of investing in early stage, serving on listed boards, and having built a business or a few.
Yeah.
People is the determinant of whether you succeed or not. It's people. I mean, yes, you can have a good market, and I think market's important. I think, to be honest, if you're investing, if you're in the right place, the market can sometimes carry bad teams. But for longevity, even through the cycles, a good team is important.
So you're saying you can have a bad team in a good market.
And you'll know.
Literally.
They're teams which I would put question marks on, which, for all intents and purposes, have survived when they shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But they were in a good market. The market carried them. So and that happens a lot. And so often it's important in this game to also be humble. Because you may think that you're crushing it because everyone's crushing it, you're raising money or you're getting featured in places. But actually keep a function of where you found yourself versus your ability to operate.
Yeah, the right place at the right time.
Yeah. But I think to the point, around just the importance of team.
Yeah.
I would almost argue that the earlier you are, the more the team matters. And not because, early stage is not much revenue or growth. It's because, think about it this way. If there are 10 of you in a company, or 9 of you, and you hire one more person, that's 10% of your company. So are you going to have 10% of your company be a B team, C team, D team player? Like I was catching up with
brings the average down. Yeah.
I was catching up with a good friend of mine who, I can't make it identifiable. She runs a very successful fintech company on the continent.
Okay.
And we were talking about like building and journeying and some of the lessons learned. And she was saying, look, if you had to build again, she would probably have a small team with the best people she knows. So for like A players.
Yes.
I think that's so true. And those building businesses have the benefit of actually building. If I have 800 people, I can't tomorrow say, okay, fine, 800, 400 of you, I'm cutting, I want only the best left. It's hard.
Yeah.
For whatever various reasons. When you're building, you can actually craft and be intentional. And I think that makes you more investable because it shows that you have built your team with intention. You're thinking for the future.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you can't expect your business to grow exponentially if your team is growing linearly.
Yeah.
And so you want to have a mindset of where your team is at that level.
Also.
Where as an investor can be like, hey, this team, because as a VC investor, I'm solving for a big impact and financial outcome. Yeah. Can this team get us there? Are they a team to drive us there?
Yeah. And when you're an operator, what would you look for in your team?
Willingness to learn and hunger. I think curiosity. So me, one thing is curiosity, but also two, knowing what someone's passionate about.
Okay.
I think, because like growing up, as I'm a Boy Scout, I love the outdoors, so I'm always out there. But like when you meet someone and you're having an interview and you say, like, look, what's your passion? And you see them come alive and you can say, like, hey, teach me something about what your passion is. And they go deep into something. Yeah. For me, that's saying like, look, this is someone who understands something and is willing to go deep in it.
Yeah.
And I think for me, then it's the willingness to learn and the attitude, which is important.
Yeah.
Because the reality is what will get you to your seed, your Series A, your C, what get you to IPO or decacorn levels.
Yes. Did you guys think about growing your business globally from day one?
So we knew that we're solving a global problem.
Okay.
Because obviously growing your business globally could mean growing your teams globally, having global clients. And the reality is having a global team. A founding team all from all over the world.
Yeah.
But one thing about, at least in our space and technology businesses, that you can't stop someone from Mexico coming to your site and signing up and giving you credit card details. So, so we had that early on our journey. We did a translation of our platform into Spanish. And we're like, we didn't expect to do that at that point in time, but we got a very big lead coming in. We're like, okay, we didn't know we were marketing there, but they found us. Let's go.
That was at what stage? Which series?
Seed.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a website up. It was a sexy website. Website was sexy, bro.
Yeah.
But I think it was, and look, we forced it to us. I was like, look, fine, it's a big client, doesn't make sense. And obviously we had to like custom pricing because we're like translating this engine and building stuff to make it get there.
Yeah.
But again, I think the key thing was we knew we were solving a big problem.
Yeah.
And so that's why even when we thought like, look, we should apply for Y Combinator, we were like, look, it's a global opportunity. None of us from the global south have these networks in the US or whatever it may be. Yeah. Let's go there and partner with guys that do. Yeah. Obviously now as entrepreneurs and investors, we have those networks, but back then it wasn't so easy as an African child to try go and break into those ecosystems.
Yeah.
And so we were intentional about the scale of the problem.
Yeah.
And as we built, we realized the problem was bigger than we even thought it was.
Interesting. You've touched on an interesting part that you decided to go out to SF. So just the lengths you guys are willing to take to make this work. You shipped yourselves to SF and to Silicon Valley to build that community and everything. Do you think businesses in Africa, founders, ambitious founders in Africa, have strong enough opportunity to build global businesses? Because I happen to be in this ecosystem and I see the number of pre-seed companies. Are there enough, as an investor, are there enough quality companies? What do you think about the caliber of founders? What do you think is really strong and what do you think is missing?
I think the caliber is strong.
Okay.
I would argue that as Africa, our best export are our people, sadly. And there are a number of Africans who are dominating on the global stages. And many of them aren't looking at the continent or thinking of coming back.
Yeah.
And so, one, you've got a situation with a strong human capital base, which we're seeing perform at a global scale continually, time and time again.
Yeah.
And in the same vein, you've got a continent where there's so many opportunities or challenges that can be solved with technology. And I think that's this juncture, which I believe can be solved.
Okay.
And you're seeing many people come back to the continent as, repats who are seeing colleagues, going to the Ivy League schools and being like, I smoked this guy in class. This guy built a $10 billion business. Like, why can't I build this thing? And I think that's the energy people need to have, because they have to back themselves. But I don't think you need to go abroad to have that exposure. Okay. I mean, like, there's so many resources. There's so much stuff you can read and learn. Tuning to this podcast, shout out to be able to learn just the journey and learn from other people's experiences. I think often people defer the building journey because they feel like they're not ready or that next step. Whereas everything you need, you have. Or if not, it's at your fingertips, literally.
Yeah.
And so, or if not your fingertips because you are not a millennial or boomer, on your thumbs. And I think from that perspective, it's something that is missing. But I do feel that there are strong entrepreneurs that are building on the continent. I just think some of those people are abroad.
And you think they should come back?
100%. I think the funny thing is, so I've probably worked and traveled in over 40 countries.
Yeah.
Maybe worked in half of those.
Okay.
And the reality is that the opportunities for a young person building in Africa are like, I'm intentionally choosing to live on the continent. I could live in many places right now.
Yeah.
And it's not because, I like my dogs, which I do, but in the same vein, the opportunity just to create value and capture value is incredible here. And really do that at a societal level. And I think, yes, you can go to the valley and do well there, but I think this is home. Yeah. And there's a nuance of understanding the problem. I'm a big believer that if you understand the problem better than anybody else, you'll make a better solution. And I think we, as people from the continent, have that advantage, to be honest.
Yeah. So talking about the problem and the opportunity, do you feel that, okay, come back to the continent, solve the problem? Are the economies big enough to support building businesses here? Or it's a mindset shift, like, let's build for the world?
So, I mean, we can think about the stats and we can go and we can have some fun here. But think about, 5 years ago, African Continental Free Trade Agreement was signed. And just that opportunity alone of intra-Africa trade is $460 billion.
Jeez.
Like, that's a good amount of action. That's the GDP of South Africa. Like, I mean, like, so, and that's even, we're even looking across the borders, just staying within.
Yeah.
Don't go across an ocean. Just stay within the landmass that is Africa.
Yeah.
And I think that's where often we discount the opportunity that is in front of us. The reality is, 1, we're populous. 2, we've got natural resources. 3, we've got some really smart people. Yeah. Like, we've got all the ingredients for successful peace. Yes, some will argue one missing piece is capital. Okay. But I would argue in aggregate, there's enough capital on the continent. The question is where it's allocated. So, for example, we'll often hear that, like, look, venture capital doesn't get enough money. And the reality is this: if you think about a American pension fund versus an African pension fund, the allocation they make to alternatives and venture is a lot smaller in Africa. Yeah. And I understand it's a more, like, it's earlier in the journey and so forth. But even just on normalizing that will have an outsized impact. So right now, when I was intentional about building a fund, I was like, look, I want to partner with tier 1 international investors. And I see my role as being able to not only put in my own capital and African capital, but crowd in international capital into Africa. Yeah. But ultimately, as founders exit and the ecosystem grows, my hope is that everyone starts flying back into the ecosystem. So we get to that point.
Yeah.
So I think everything is there for us to really thrive and capture the opportunity, maybe bar financing in certain phases of the journey. I think private equity is well developed. Our listed markets are okay.
Yeah.
I think it's about walking before you run early on. And that's why I've been so intentional about focusing on the venture side of things.
Yeah, interesting. When did you decide to make that leap actually into venture? What
Yeah,
drove
it's
that?
interesting. I mean, so I briefly mentioned at the outset where I actually was investing in venture investments before I was actually building.
Yeah.
And I also mentioned that, the best investors are entrepreneurs and the best entrepreneurs are investors. And so I guess I've always been an investor. And even on the GO1 side, you've bought and sold businesses, even in that ecosystem.
Yeah.
I think for me, it was more so when GO1 got to the point where I wasn't required from a day-to-day basis. I was able to take a step back.
Okay.
Then I was able to say, okay, fine. How best can I use the skill set I've required and built over time to be able to add value to the ecosystem?
Yes.
And so that was about just over 3 years ago now.
Yeah.
When I said, like, look, I really want to see how I can leverage my experience to be the investor I wish I had when I was building my businesses.
Got it. Very interesting. And as an investor now, you mentioned some of the things you look out for. What are some of the industries where you think there's a lot of potential for the next decade? Or
it's interesting, as an investor, I always say, beyond where the opportunity is, I ask myself, where do I have the right to invest and to win?
Okay.
Because it's also important to make sure. So when I think about where I choose to invest, it's often where there's a big impact, and two, where either me or my partners that I invest with have experience in operating in those spaces.
Okay.
Because certain spaces where I don't have exposure in.
Yeah.
And that's why again, to the point around, do you go solo, do you have a team?
Yeah.
I'm always like, how do you bring complementary skill sets through your partnership, through your investment committee, through your advisory committee, through your LPs in your fund? But I think to your question around particularly where things excite me, it's basic things. I mean, for a long time, we focused a lot on, for example, the payment infrastructure. So you think about how fintech has evolved from beyond payments.
Yeah.
So you could do payments, then you could do payments. Fine, you could do payments. Now you're doing about, facilitation, orchestration. You went from orchestration, okay, fine. How do you then, finance those transactions? Then you get from financing to, and so it's the evolution of an ecosystem. But I think there's still so much that can happen in the fintech space.
Okay.
I'm also a big believer that, once you're able to transact, you still got to move goods and services. And so logistics is a big part of that equation. If you want to unlock that $460 billion opportunity on the continent, you got to move stuff.
Yeah.
And cross-border trade. And so the reality is there's a big piece around thinking about logistics there.
Yeah.
Even in the same vein, think about the population our content has. I mean, literally we say bread and butter issues, but like food, agriculture, health, those things are important, education. And so you think about things that are fundamental, and I like to use the SDGs as a lens for that. But the reality is there's so many unique opportunities for you to create value.
Yeah.
But I think the big thing is often not to get lost in the macro, but ask yourself, start with a niche problem you can solve.
Okay.
And then off the back of that, grow your impact. Almost earn the right to serve a new customer base. I think the biggest when you build a business, especially when you have limited cash, is to take the big, economist presentations, big numbers, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But you actually forget which individual person's problem are you solving?
Yes.
Which company, and what's that problem?
Yeah.
Because I'm telling you, no company or agent is saying, okay, so I am a Spaza store or small POS.
Yeah.
How do I capture the $460 billion opportunity in a country that's 1,000 miles away?
No. Yeah.
They're worried about bread and butter issues. And I think it's very important to not lose sight of that.
Solve that bread and butter issue.
Solve the issue that's in front of you and earn the right to solve the next issue.
Interesting. I think it's YC that really encourages founders to find 100 customers who love you.
Yes.
Yeah. So
this is the 1,000 that like you.
Yes.
Those true fans. Exactly that. And I think,
slowly.
I remember back in the day, the highly coveted YC jumper, but even the t-shirts was like, and Paul Graham said it very well.
Yeah.
Build something people want.
Yes.
And I think it's so important because the question is why want versus need?
Yeah.
Because people need things that they won't get. I mean, so I'm an actuary. Insurance is one of those thriving spaces in Africa where our penetration is than 3%. We need insurance. On a risk-adjusted basis, everyone should have insurance. A rational decision.
Yeah.
But do we buy it? No. But if you build something people want, then you can then go deep and you have that almost latent demand of people saying, you're solving a problem for me. I want your solution.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Build something people want.
Yeah.
So I think another area I'd like to dive in is red flags. As an investor, what are some common red flags, like mistakes founders make all the time? You're like,
I think red flags show themselves in different parts of the journey. So as an investor, you might have entrepreneurs pitching to you, but then there's also like as an entrepreneur building, what are the red flags that in your business when you go deeper? But I think ultimately, entrepreneurs that don't know their business and don't know their numbers, I mean, you're asking me to give you money, yet with the current money you have, you're not able to be on top of that in terms of, you know, your numbers, your growth, the cash you have, the whatever. Then I'm hard pressed to give you money, because then I might take away from that is you aren't a good steward of capital. You can hear the stories of, you know, so John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins, he was the lead investor alongside Madrona into Amazon's first round. And he tells a story of how whatever he asked Jeff Bezos a question. And okay, Jeff was flexing though, because Jeff came from a private equity, a hedge fund background. And he gave him, like, I think it was the sales for the day, whatever it was, gave him the exact number, was like for the last whatever period of time. And then he did like a SQL query in some old mainframe database and got the exact number out of the system. I think then guys like, okay, this technically knows the stuff, you know. And I think you hear those stories, but I think that's still true today. I think one, knowing your business, knowing your numbers is so important. I think also being, especially as an investor, because, you know, when we invest now, we try to be partners and sparring partners to the business. So we'll come on and get board seats, we invest meaningful amounts of money. And so you want someone who you can trust, you know, and someone who's being able to be vulnerable, saying, look, hey, this is happening, this didn't go to plan, this happened. I mean, even as an IC, the entrepreneurs have said, hey, like, look, we tried this business, the thing we want to integrate to, the API sucked, we didn't get our license in time, we had to pivot. And the guys were like, after the fact, they were like, actually, this is the guy we like. He's able to tell us the bad stuff. He's honestly transparent. Because I think many founders try to over sugarcoat things. And sadly, as a former operator and operator myself, you can see where the body's hide. And so look, clearly someone saw my nonsense and let me go through. But I'm not going to let the nonsense go through on my and my LP's money. And so from that perspective, I think it's a key one. So I think
makes you a good investor.
so I think one, you know, knowing your numbers, but two, I think it's being honest and transparent. I mean, building.
Okay. What, as an entrepreneur, as an investor, what would you say is your superpower that's led you this far?
Empathy. I think empathy, both as a business leader and manager, putting yourself in your people's shoes and trying to understand what their successes, what their fears and hopes are for themselves in their careers, and supporting them to get the best out of them towards the common goal of the business. But I think as an investor, having empathy of what it means to be an operator, the trials, the tribulations, things don't go your way, you miss your targets, and just having that compassion to know that journey.
Makes sense. I was at an event last week, and this venture capital firm was presenting a report about founder wellness. I don't know if you guys are partners or you might have seen this report. And one of the questions was like, for founders, how many of you think your investors care about you? Can you guess what the answer was?
Sure. So hopefully with my portfolio companies, but care about you, maybe 20%?
Yeah, so it was actually 10%.
Wow.
And this was responses from about 200 founders.
Wow.
So that's how bad it is. No, so I mean, empathy is a big thing.
It's so important. And I think you know, the funny thing is building a business, you know, you don't wake up one night you're a unicorn. Like it's a 10-year plus journey. And so to be on a journey with someone that doesn't care about you, it's untenable. I mean, like imagine just like where you're like, have to look over your shoulder, worried someone's trying to take you out and they don't care about your well-being. You can't be like vulnerable. I mean, it's a wild one, but it's unfortunate. But look, all we can do is try to raise the bar. And again, in our individual interactions, at least have that level of concern and care.
Yes, absolutely. So I'd like to go into, you know, sort of lessons. And there's been a lot of gems. But for somebody looking, let's go for both sides. Somebody looking to be a founder, what's the advice you'd give them around the journey?
I think if you're looking to be a founder, you probably shouldn't be a founder.
Okay.
I think if you're
should have been a founder. Okay.
If you're seeking to solve a problem, and create value, and hopefully create wealth for yourself in future, I think that's the journey for you.
Okay.
But as a founder, just ask yourself what problem you want to solve and do the work understanding that problem. Because the more you understand the problem, the more conviction you'll have about taking that step. Because many people come from a world of corporates or they're in somebody else's business. And so and again, understanding that problem you want to solve and gain conviction around that will give you the conviction to make the right moves to get there.
Okay.
And I think that's time well spent.
Makes sense. And we need more investors in the continent. I think when you're talking about all the opportunities, you said, okay, capital, there's something you can do there.
Yeah.
So, what would you advise anybody looking to be an investor? And by this, people assume that being an investor means like you have to have the cash to invest yourself. But there's also people who decide, I'll make it my mission over the next decade to go out there and find capital, whether it's locally, like find the rich guys, get them to invest in businesses, or go out there and get the money, right?
Yeah.
What would you say about that journey? And I think this is something founders, entrepreneurs need to understand, that like managing capital, managers of capital, when you go up to somebody who calls themselves an investor or an investor, they're not refusing to give you money just cause. Like they also go through a process of trying to get this money, and they must allocate it properly.
Yeah.
So I think just unpack that a bit for people to understand how it is to really be in an investor's shoes.
Yeah, I think investor, to your point, is a broad term.
Yeah.
I mean, like even entrepreneurs are a broad term. I mean, and so I think it's different types of investors. And so you can either invest, to your point, so different ways, right? So one, you can use your own money or somebody else's money. Even if you're using your own money plus somebody else's money, different ways they're structured. So you can have a typical fund where it's like your investors trust you with an amount of money to manage for a period of time, typically 10 years. And you invest that money for a particular return, and you share in the return over a threshold. So it's not your money, but you have to get a certain return threreshold. The other ones where also you could have a vehicle that is a permanent capital vehicle, where they put money in, and that vehicle is an evergreen one where you can just keep investing and you recycle the profits and so forth. Most funds in Africa are the former, where they do take money from investors. There's a certain required rate of return they have to hit before they start getting any of the benefit from it. So, and typically, like, in a typical fund, the rate is that those thresholds aren't low, because people are raising often in hard currency, in dollars and euros. And so if your currency is going this way and your business is going, it's hard. And that's why often I'll tell entrepreneurs that even for me as a VC, just because I say no to investing you doesn't mean you're a bad business. Doesn't mean you won't even make a couple $100 million. It comes down to the point of, are you the right business for venture capital? Because the reality is, as a venture capitalist, you want to have a big outcome because you're putting risk capital fairly early on. And so risk reward, you want to get that return. Also, you have the thresholds to hit. And I think often, also comes down to ambition. I've seen founders who are like, look, hey, I'm raising my business, post-money valuation of 5. And I ask the entrepreneur, what does success look like? And they'll be like, look, I want to get bought by this other person. I know this other person's valuation is only 100 million. Okay. So if your goal is to get bought by 100 million company, then the reality is going to buy you for nothing more than 20. And yes, for me to go from 5 to 20, that is, you're returning money, but at a fund level, I'm not going to be able to return capital to my investor at that level. And so for me, that's why also the ambition of the founder and the scalability of the business. And that's why whenever investments are in technology, because technology gives you more scale, at least with the outcome. And so often when you think about investors saying no, it's not only because, the business is bad, you're a bad person. It's about whether you can achieve venture scale. And so from that perspective, it's both as a money manager, think about ultimately, often many of our investors are institutional investors. That's the money of hospitals, of pensioners, of civil servants. These are like the big pension funds who ultimately allocate money ultimately to us. And so if you think about who your ultimate beneficiaries, we're working to return their money, because the reality is when someone's investing their pension money, in 35 years time, whatever it was, they need to have a pension. We need to make sure we're getting a return that over our fund cycle, we can return to that level. And I think often when you remember who you're actually servicing, it's not about being greedy and wanting to get the best deal. It's about saying, how can I, as a steward of capital, allocate that money most effectively for that particular purpose?
Okay. And this must be it's a high pressure environment. So as Melvyn, how do you deal with that?
I think the best things in life are going to be high pressure. If you're feeling comfortable, you're probably doing the wrong thing. And so I always seek discomfort, because it means I'm doing things at a bigger scale. It means I'm pushing myself and I'm also learning. And so very intentional about doing that. And so very fortunate that I think, there are many ways in which I think one can manage stress. But the biggest thing is perspective. I remember my days when I was in banking and consulting where the model was due this at whatever time in the morning, or the slide had to be changed by this or whatever. And yes, you get the work done. But if you take a step back and you ask yourself, like, is me stressing about this going to make it any more effective about getting it done? Answer is often no. Like, stress is often counterproductive to achieving the outcome.
Yeah,
There are very few instances where stress actually helps you get a better outcome.
for sure.
Yes, create urgency. Yes, create focus, but stress is different. And so for me, it's often about having that perspective and knowing, like, is how I'm feeling and regulating my emotions, how I feel about this, actually helping me achieve the objective or not? And so, yes, it's okay to feel uncomfortable, but I think stress is often self-inflicted, and it's a reaction to a situation. It's a reaction. It's not the situation.
It's a reaction. Yeah.
And I think it's that perspective that helps me avoid going into spirals of stress and so forth. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we won't find ourselves in high pressure environments. I think for me, often when those situations, there are very few problems that entrepreneurs face that someone hasn't faced. Like,
Nothing new under the sun.
nothing is, we'll say, yes, you can tell me you're building a unique business, I back you. But
Yeah.
like, the problems are really unique. And so often it's about getting that perspective. And that's why I'm a big believer in reading biographies, because again, you often will romanticize someone's journey. You can go see the, Facebook post I made in 2015 saying, hey guys, I'm raising my seed round, my pre-seed round. I must have been trying to raise £30,000. I was like, hey guys, me and Andrew at my college, in my university at Oxford, raising money. And you can then fast forward, whatever, unicorn run in 2021.
Yeah.
And be like, these guys were just, killing it for the last 7 years.
Yeah.
It was hard. But I think often you can romanticize the journey. And that's why I'm very big on understanding the detail and nuance. Because I think when you understand that, you appreciate that what the pain you're going through, the pressure you're feeling, is a part of the journey and should be embraced.
I love it. We talked about The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It's a great book. What's your favorite biography?
Oof. So that one's definitely up there, particularly when I was building. I think it's just like incredible to be able to, because very, very few entrepreneurs share the nitty gritty of it.
Yeah.
But they go so deep in that book that, like, for me, just like, it was so relatable. I mean, reading that book, and I think at the same time, I think it was HBO, Silicon Valley, the documentary came out. And I was like, like Eric Bachman, and I felt like I was living the dream there in like my ramen noodle day. So that's definitely been up there. I think another one, which isn't really a biography, but it's from the 1960s, called Ernest Oppenheimer and the Development of Economic Development of Southern Africa.
Okay.
So Ernest Oppenheimer was one of the patrons behind Anglo-America, one of the world's biggest miners.
Yeah.
At some point, Anglo-American and its affiliated companies were, I think, 30% of South Africa's GDP.
Jeez.
And about 70% of the JSE, the listed stock exchange. So in the 80s, like, these guys were the economy.
Yeah.
But I think often you discount where that journey began. Because, so now we're going into the weeds here, but the family's known for many things, and there are many businesses you'll never know that they used to own at some point, but like they began in the diamond space. And you must appreciate that when the first time, Oppenheimer first set foot in Africa, he was a young man in his 20s. But at that point in time, diamonds were technically tied up. I mean, at that point in time, Barney Bonato, Cecil John Rhodes had already died.
Yeah.
Like, the guys, the titans who actually had made money in diamonds were already like there.
Yeah.
But what I really love is his journey of realizing that he came as a young man, immersed himself in the community, being Kimberley at the time, added value, had a brief stint in politics, was a bit disillusioned, but only began building Anglo-American in his 30s, mid-30s. So literally, and again, like, you think like, am I too late to start? Because I wasn't a, wonder kid coding. It's never too late.
Wonder kid.
And my mother always reminds me about, I think it was KFC or the Colonel, someone who began building their business in their 70s or 60s. And I mean, like, so it's never too late to start. I like those biographies because it brings the detail out. But more importantly, the importance of how one or few industries can actually pioneer. Because if you go to the Zambian copper belts, that was effectively built by the team. You go to many cities in South Africa, that was built. Johannesburg wasn't for the mining. They would be, and so like, you can actually show, best by showing up and solving big problems, you can actually have big outcomes that can transform economies and continents. Yeah. And I think I like that biography because it's almost like a bit of an economic history, but it's so detailed in thinking about the journey that it took, and this thinking that to get there. Because I think often romanticize like, oh no, they were just lucky and wealthy and they got there. No, there was someone in the bloodline who secured the bloodline by grinding and adding value. And he was a small guy and he partnered. The reason why it's called Anglo-American, even though everyone's in the UK and it initially had British roots, was because the American was actually JP Morgan. So JP Morgan was the big funder of them back then. The same way Cecil John Rhodes, who at the time was, owned half of Zimbabwe and Cape Town, everything, he was funded by the Rothschilds. So yes, everyone partners with someone to get where they're going.
Yes.
And I think often we forget that, on the journey you have to partner. Someone put someone on.
Yeah.
And that's important. I like those biographies that give that perspective.
That's really cool. I love biographies as well and documentaries that go into history, because it's when you understand history, then you're able to really cover out. I think it's Munga or somebody who talked about history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I love that quote. I repeat it all the time.
Yeah.
Because it just makes so much sense.
Perspective is important.
Yeah, perspective. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's been a really, really inspiring session.
No, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for making the time. Any parting shot you'd love to give fellow Africans?
Yeah,
builders.
I think one, if you're building, don't wait.
Yeah,
I think it's such an exciting time to be building on the continent, and you don't be the one that waited or missed the opportunity.
Yeah,
and so if you have an idea, speak to people, put it out there, engage.
Yeah,
I think you'll be surprised how you can actually be ready to build.
Yeah,
and I'd say give it horns.
Actually, you just reminded me something, because there's very few builders who've got into unicorn in this continent so far. So far, we're coming.
Yeah, you see it, bro.
Yeah. So what? Yeah, I'm curious about your personal relationship with money, because people might view you and see the numbers, see commas, but curious about what does that mean for you as Melvyn?
Different contexts. I think at some point money is a way of accounting.
Okay.
I think yes, a certain amount of money you need to live a good lifestyle, to have the things that you desire and want in your life.
Yeah.
This is a point at which you could lose half your money and your lifestyle won't change. And I think money, yes, is a good way of keeping account of where you're at and where you're going. But I think you mustn't let that distract you from what the main thing is. And for me, it's jobs. For some people, maybe somebody else. And I think often it's important to remind yourself that, like, what does money enable you to do?
Yeah.
So for me, does it mean that, in January, I can take my squad of, family, 15 of us, away to a resort for a week holiday?
Yeah.
Yes. Like, that is what money enables me to do. And I think often, depending on your stage, we often forget why we're building. And money comes in, we forget actually we're building so we can have that free time with the family.
Yeah.
So we can support those people in your home village.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's where money has different things at different levels. But at a certain scale, it's a way of accounting more than anything else.
A way of accounting. I like that. Never had that. Cool. That was fantastic. Thanks a lot for coming through.
Oh, thank you, bro.
Yeah, and champions, we're just getting started in South Africa, guys. So you've heard from this guy, and he's done amazing things. And the goal is to bring you more and more entrepreneurs, more and more perspectives, so that as you go along your own journey of building that next big transformational business for Africa, you have the best insights. That's what we're all about. So if you'd like to get notified when we drop the next episode, please subscribe. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, everywhere. It's chapter.co, chpter.co. And we'll be tagging Melvyn when we release this episode, so you can follow him as well and see what he's up to in his next phase as an investor. Yeah, so until next time, take care. Thanks.
Thank you.
We got it next. That's how you finesse. We come for they next. We come to collect. Did it all on my own, yeah. When it brought it back home, yeah. Now they calling my phone, yeah. But I'm all in my zone. They not a threat. Tell them reset. When they at their best, we still not impressed. Did it all on my own.